Imagine a king ruling half the world and still wanting the other half. A man who believed he was born with the divine right to rule the entire planet. In 1580, Felipe II of Spain saw the chance to fulfill his dynasty's dream, to unite all of Iberia and the known world under one crown. That ambition's price would forever change Portugal's fate. Felipe would have, after dominating the Kingdom of Portugal, uttered the famous phrase, "This kingdom is mine, I inherited it, bought it, and conquered it," thus demonstrating the three stages of how the Castilian king came to power in Portugal. But this soon brings us a series of questions. How did this king manage to take the throne of Portugal, and what other claimants had the right to the Portuguese throne? What strategies and alliances did the Spanish king know how to forge? And how did he prevent a new battle of Aljubarrota from happening with the defeat of the Spanish? In today's video, we will find out how Felipe II took over the throne and how he managed to consolidate the empire where the sun never sets. But before we start the video, if you like our content, become a member of our channel right now. This gives you access to our group and exclusive content like live classes. To delve even deeper into the behind the scenes of history, to understand why Felipe II wanted the throne of Portugal so much, we first need to understand the nature of his family and his reign. Felipe II was born into the Habsburg dynasty from the House of Austria as the son of Emperor Charles III and Isabel de Avis. The motto of his family was AEIOU, which stands for Austria est imperare orbe universo, meaning in Latin that it is Austria's destiny to rule the whole world. Charles was King of Castile, Aragon, Navarre, Naples, Archduke of Austria, Duke of Milan, Lord of Flanders, Holy Roman Emperor, and King of all Spanish America. And Charles thus wished to unify all of Christendom and the entire world under his crown, in a system known as polycentric universal monarchy. Through this system, each of his domains would have its own laws, even though they all had the same king. And so the laws of Austria would not apply in Castile, nor those of Naples and Flanders. The king had to respect all the laws of his domains, and the domains had to respect the majesty of their king. Felipe, although he looked up to the greatness of his father, was practically raised by his mother Isabel, who was a skilled Portuguese queen and who ruled Castile whenever Carlos needed to be away. And beyond this megalomaniac desire to dominate the world, the kings of Castile and Leon always had the desire to unify the Iberian Peninsula as well. One of the first to explicitly show this intention was Afonso VII of Leon and Castile, in the 12th century called the Emperor of all Spain. The sovereign wanted to have supremacy over the other kingdoms of the peninsula. If the Holy Roman Empire had kings who were subordinate to the emperor, the same could happen in the Iberian Peninsula. In fact, at the time of Portugal's independence, he tried to make Dom Afonso Henriques his vassal, but to escape from his cousin, Dom Afonso Henriques offered vassalage to the Pope, thus consolidating the independence of Portugal. And later, many kings tried to achieve this union. Through battles with Dom Afonso V of Portugal and Dom João I of Castile, or through marriages and births, with little Miguel de Paz, who was meant to inherit Portugal, Castile, and Aragon, but died as a child. And this claim seemed to materialize when Dom Sebastião disappeared in the fields of Morocco. The young Portuguese king, eager to launch a crusade in infidel lands. He even asked his uncle Felipe for Castilian troops to help him. And Felipe sent another 2,000 Castilian soldiers to help the young Portuguese king. That was equivalent to 10% of the expeditionary troops. But King Dom Sebastião ends up disappearing in the middle of the battlefield. And, even worse, the young king hadn't left any descendants to inherit the crown, and so the throne of Portugal was left without a king. His great-uncle, Cardinal Dom Henrique, and Dom Henrique, being a cardinal and already old, asked the Pope for a dispensation so he can marry and try to produce an heir. But the Pope does not grant the cardinal's request, and he passes away at the age of 68 in 1580. And Dom Henrique, instead of appointing a successor to the kingdom, leaves his will practically empty on the subject. In this way, there were three possible successors to occupy the throne of Portugal. The most legitimate candidate was Catarina de Portugal, Duchess of Bragança. She was a direct male line descendant of Dom Manuel through Dom Duarte, Duke of Guimarães. Thus, among the three candidates, she was the one with the most legitimacy to claim the throne. Another candidate was Dom Antonio, prior of Crato and grandson of Dom Manuel, descended through Dom Luis of Portugal. But, unlike Dona Catarina, he was an illegitimate son, being the son of the Duke of Beja and the New Christian woman. Lastly, Felipe II was descended from Dom Manuel through Isabel de Avisa's maternal line. While the prior of Crato was illegitimate, true legitimacy for the throne came through Catarina de Portugal's paternal line. However, the prior of Crato was much more popular in Portugal than Catarina. Having participated in the Battle of Alcácer Quibir alongside Dom Sebastião, Dom Antonio was the only one to strongly claim the crown, even being acclaimed king by the people in Lisbon. An illegitimate child has occupied the Portuguese crown before. The Aviz dynasty was born precisely when Dom João I, the illegitimate son of Dom Pedro I, rose to the position of king with the support of the people in the courts. They rebelled against Dom João I of Castile, who was defeated at the Battle of Aljubarrota. But the Castilian king at the time, Felipe II, did not intend to make the same mistakes as in the 14th century. If in the 14th century, Dom João of Castile distributed Portuguese positions among Castilian nobles, Felipe would do exactly the opposite. The king quickly sought to get closer to the great men of Portugal to secure the support of the nobility. And in this regard, it's worth highlighting his meticulous personality. As a shrewd king and skilled politician, he knew how to win the support of many Portuguese. He first won over the kingdom's merchants, who saw opportunities in Castilian markets and access to Spanish America's silver. A strong community of Portuguese merchants formed in Peru. Felipe also easily gained the support of the clergy by preaching the message of a strong and Catholic king, who would unite the forces of Portugal and Spain to fight the advance of heresy in Europe and to spread the message of Christ throughout the world. And finally, Felipe managed to win the support of the nobility by promising to respect their customs and privileges, and also by offering compensation and showing good faith. For example, after the Battle of Alcácer Quibir, many nobles, knights, and soldiers were imprisoned in Moroccan territory waiting for ransom. And did the old cardinal king empty the kingdom's coffers to bring back the prisoners and pay compensations as well? The Spanish king spent a lot of money to bring back the noble hostages of the kingdom. That was in addition to the bodies of those who died in battle so they could be properly buried in Portugal. This increased Felipe's support among the nobility, who were most affected by the Alcácer Quibir disaster. But besides gaining support, Felipe also knew he would have to resort to arms, and so he calls one of his most experienced generals, even though he was in prison. At that time, Duke of Alba was exiled for disobeying the king and allowing his son to marry a noblewoman, even though he had been promised to another noble by the king himself, thus defying a royal order. But Felipe soon calls the Duke to take command of the troops that would enter Portugal to seize the crown. This led the Duke to utter the famous phrase, "You are the only monarch on earth who takes a general out of prison to give him another crown." The Duke of Alba meets the troops of the Prior of Crato at the Battle of Alcantara in 1580. According to Joaquim Verissimo Serrão, just before the battle, some nobles urged the Prior of Crato to escape to Brazil and set up a kingdom in exile. But Dom Antonio believed in a miracle, almost like a new battle of Aljubarrota, in which somehow they would defeat the Castilians. However, the reality was disastrous. Dom Antonio lost at the Battle of Alcantara, and Philip crushed all resistance to his rule, like the amphibious landing on Terceira Island in the Azores, led by the undefeated commander Álvaro de Bazan. Philip ultimately secured the Portuguese crown at the Cortes of Tomar in 1581. There, he committed to respecting Portuguese autonomy in all its terms. Trade with the eastern territories and Brazil would be carried out only with Portuguese ships and merchants. The kingdom's documents would be written only in the Portuguese language, which the king himself spoke fluently, and Portugal would continue with its own military orders. The courts would always be convened, and the Portuguese titles and privileges granted by previous kings would be respected, maintaining Portuguese autonomy. Felipe thus achieved his great goal, which was to become Lord of the West and the East, to possess an empire even greater than that of his father, Carlos, and to come closer to fulfilling the dream of a universal Catholic monarchy. But Felipe would still encounter resistance. France. Some exiled nobles like Dom Juan de Castro fueled the myth of Sebastianism, spreading the idea that Dom Sebastião was actually alive and that he would return soon, portraying the missing king in an almost messianic light. And the enemies of Castile, in turn, began to attack the Portuguese territories, which were less guarded than the Castilian ones. This would eventually result in the continuous decline of the Portuguese Empire overseas, with the loss of many possessions in the east and the constant invasions of Brazil, which in turn was also expanding beyond the Tordesillas line. But what's interesting is that the Iberian Union, despite having been harmful to Portugal, seemed like an excellent idea. At the time, the expectation of a universal Catholic monarchy under the House of Habsburg, combined with Felipe's prudence and sagacity, made possible a dream that many kings before him had. Antonio, as mentioned before, the Habsburgs' family motto claimed they were destined to rule the world. Felipe, after taking the throne of Portugal, adopted a new motto, non sufficit orbis, which means the world is not enough. And that was the way the Castilian managed to buy, inherit, and conquer the Portuguese kingdom and crown. And this Iberian Union would last for more than 60 years. Portuguese Restoration in 1640. And did you know the details of the Iberian Union? What surprised you the most? So, leave your comment right now to support our work and take the opportunity to become a member of the channel right now. That way, you'll be able to dive deeper and learn even more about the fascinating Iberian history.